United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that global governance institutions do not adequately serve developing countries, particularly ones in the continent of Africa. Speaking at a news conference in Pretoria, Guterres added that more meaningful solutions were needed to address the debt crises globally. And this, of course, as you know, the big question is, as he's here, also South Africa, all eyes are on our country to ensure that whether or not will the continent find its way, especially when it comes to the expression of some of the, the concerns around the continent, as the presidency of the G20 is now in South Africa's shoulders. So certainly quite a big focus there on this particular story. And a little later on, Sophie Mokoena will be in conversation there with the United Nations Secretary General. But KhayelihleKhumalo is here with us in studio, and we can of course expect that, Khayelihle, good afternoon to you. The issues of transformation, especially when one thinks about the fact that, globally, the financial systems are also coming under scrutiny. You also think about the fact that right now, the SDGs, nowhere near accomplishing some of them. What can we expect?
Quite a very big moment for South Africa. I mean, you go back to that address by Mr. Guterres, where he really spoke about financial justice, but really throwing down the gauntlets on the G20 countries and making sure that they use their economic clout. I mean, these are powerful economies alongside the developing countries, but also talking about some of the challenges facing a number of countries in the global south. We're really talking about the importance of making sure that if you want to address, for example, inequality, poverty, social inclusion, so these countries really should work hard and put concerted efforts so that we really see that equity, we see that equitable world that they are striving to have. But also something that is quite key as well has to be around climate change. This is something that is almost just became his hallmark. Wherever he goes, he talks about climate change, about its impact, especially for the developing world as well. I mean, in Africa and in so many countries as well, the climate change effects are quite massive and really just having a bearing in terms of the economic outputs and really talk about sustainable development. But like you just said, where you really indicated that the financial system must be overhauled and reformed to address some of these challenges.
Back to your earlier point, the world is not short of reports that are diagnosing what is wrong and what is leading to these inequalities. And the big focus now is on what is to be done about this. And I suppose that's where his words of moving from words to action come in.
Very much so. I think there's a sense of fatigue that, all the time we see these big summits, leaders coming together, declarations are formed, but also really challenging the shepherds, the finance minister, saying this is the engine that is charting the agenda. So that come next year, November in South Africa, in Johannesburg, the culmination of South Africa's G20 presidency, we can see action. We can see Global South really moving in the very good direction, but also saying that the developed world as well should really open the room so that we see these reforms being ushered, but also talking about technological advancement. I mean, the artificial intelligence, once again talking about justice, because it was a multi-pronged approach where he was talking about these reforms around the architecture when it comes to financing, but also talking about climate change. But another very critical element, the evolution that we're seeing, the technological change happening right before us, but also really talking about a number of issues. I mean, for example, so many conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa, the eastern part of the DRC, especially with a country like South Africa playing a very pivotal role in terms of peacekeeping. Currently, South African troops alongside with their Tanzanian counterparts and Malawi deployed to try and stabilize the eastern parts of Congo.
And also, Khayelihle, one of the other big focuses, that we've seen over time is that the issue of Sudan is also not getting as much of the attention when it comes to the world as it should.
Very much so, Bong, especially because I think around the UN Security Council, the reforms that he spoke about, where he said the current formats really represent the realities of 1945, saying it's absolutely important for the UN Security Council to be expanded to allow the African nations to really have a seat, because the bulk of the issues around peace and security are mainly from the African continent. And you have so many envoys as well that's working with the UN to try and deal with this situation. But obviously we haven't really seen as much momentum being shown to that conflict in Sudan, especially given the very ferocity and the harshness where the women, the vulnerable, the children are bearing the brunt. So many people internally displaced, but also just the impact of the war where the general and the rapid force, they're not really seeing eye to eye. So there's no ceasefire anytime that is expected.
Khayelihle, and as you mention it, one thinks about just the harrowing stories that you hear from those who are on the ground there in Sudan, certainly just painting a very disturbing picture there. But thank you so much for wrapping that for us. That's SABC News reporter KhayelihleKhumalo.